I would also like to grant a moment to one of our prominent sponsors for the Santos Rodriguez 50. He's just going to take a few minutes to talk about his work and to talk about how we as members of the community can also help ensure that Santos' story and the story of our people are remembered. Please welcome City of Dallas District 2 Council Member Jesse Moreno.
Thank you. Welcome and bienvenidos. My name is Jesse Moreno and I'm the council member for the City of Dallas for District 2. I want to thank you all again for joining us this evening as we continue to learn more about the tragic murder of Santos Rodriguez. It's critical that we continue to tell the story and share the story for future generations. I look forward to hearing from the panel. We're so privileged to have such knowledgeable people with us today. Let's remember that this is not the end, as we still have work to do, ensuring that an act like this is never done again. I'll also need your help in your efforts to ensure that the Santos Recreation Center be renovated with funds from the 2024 bond program. So we'll be sharing more information on how you can help us with that. With that, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed today's panel.
Again, my name is George Padilla. I'd like an opening statement, and I entitled this An Observation. 1963, a young president of the United States of America was shot and killed in the streets of downtown Dallas. 1973, a young Mexican-American boy was shot and killed in the streets of Little Mexico, Dallas. Both lives cut short, and it can be said, one shorter than the other. Often major changes in communities, large and small, happen after an election year, after blood is spilled, after people get mad and are not going to take it anymore. In this case, the news of blood spilled and how it happened raced throughout the city of Dallas, especially in the Mexican-American community. From July 24th, Tuesday, 1973, through July 28th, Saturday, 1973, emotional reaction exploded and swept through that community. What followed was grief and sorrow, frustration and anger, outrage and protest, and finally, a march and mayhem. Today, we look at the history and legacy of Santos Rodriguez and hope we do not live in the United States of amnesia. The further details and specifics of the who, what, where, when, why, and in this case, the how, are now well documented. And our panel members were there, participants, witnesses, and then contributors to a major change in the Mexican-American community here in Dallas, all stemming from that murder on July 24th, 1973, 50 years ago. So let's begin with the first panelist and the first question too. Ms. Rhoda Sanchez Gonzalez. She was 12 years old at the time of the tragic event, the same age as Santos Rodriguez. Her father was the pastor of Primera Iglesia Bautista and ministered to the Rodriguez family, who were part of his congregation, and to the Little Mexico barrio where the Rodriguez family lived. I'd like to ask her, what are your recollections? Speak to us about how you first learned about the incident, and what was the impact to you personally as a child, to your family, and to the community. If you would please, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Jesse, and I appreciate the privilege and the honor of being asked to be on this panel.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all for being here today. My father was Dr. Rudy Sanchez, who was a great man who loved to see justice served. He stood for people and he loved people. He loved to see those who were marginalized and those who were not seen to be heard and to be have their voices brought forth. In the Holy Scriptures, in Psalm chapter 91, it says, "Blessed is he who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of the sinners, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord." My dad was a peacemaker. He was the one that tried to bring forth peace, but yet justice at the same time. So I remember a phone call to our home late that night on July 24th, 1973. That was the night that Santos was murdered. When my dad answered, he yelled loudly and said, "What? Tell me again, what happened?" His voice woke us all up. Immediately, he made some phone calls, got dressed, and left our house. I have a younger sister who was 9 and twin brothers who were 6 at the time. The next day, my mom explained what had happened. We were in disbelief and could not believe that our friend Santos Rodriguez was murdered in a police car. My dad joined together with Dallas architect Pedro Aguirre Sr., Rene Martinez, Trini Garza, Dallas lawyer Adelfa Callejo, Anita Martinez, and other Dallas leaders, as well as Ms. Rizzo, that's here on my right and on your left, to gather their thoughts on how to proceed with justice over this horrific tragedy. No one could understand why the murder happened. My father was pastor to the Rodriguez family and spoke on many television interviews and was outspoken as a Hispanic leader on behalf of their family. Our church was shaken to the core by the murder, and many were affected by the unbelievable news. As you can see in this picture here, these are 3 pictures of my dad that were taken from some videos of archive from the SMU archives that has a collection of videos of that day and during those times of the trials. This was his favorite place to be, to speak on behalf of the people. When I went to school, my classmates probably heard from their parents who my father was. I was threatened, called horrible names, and was pushed into fights to defend my father's honor, and also fights to defend myself as one of 4 Hispanics in a predominantly Anglo elementary school. We received hateful and threatening phone calls at our home, cursing at us and threatening our lives if my father continued his quest for justice. Those actions did not stop Dr. Rudy Sanchez from researching why Santos was murdered by a Dallas police officer. He just said, "Be very careful." The funeral for Santos was held at our church, Primera Iglesia Bautista Mexicana of Dallas, on 2700 Fairmount Street. It was packed that day. There were television cameras, newspaper journalists, and people from all over the country at our church to cover the memorial service. There were police officers and many people standing outside, stirring up heated actions, and were ready to move forward in protest of the Dallas Police Department and Dallas City government. My father and those leaders I mentioned above organized a march in downtown Dallas asking for justice. Our family was deeply affected by everything that happened that day. My father, Dr. Rudy Sanchez, spoke on behalf of the Rodriguez family as often as he could and was not afraid of threats to him or to our family. He believed in justice. He loved our city, but wanted to see the people that were marginalized allowed to rise up. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you listening to the story of my father, Dr. Rudy Sanchez.
Thank you so much. And that was Rhoda Sanchez Gonzalez. I'd like to take 1 minute before we go to the next panelist in regard to visuals, signs being held up and to tell us the time frame we're in. If my eyeballs are telling me the truth here, I can't see any colored panels going up. So is there what color is that? If you can give us an audible, that'd be a little bit better, because I don't think we can see that. Okay, so now we'll move on to the second panelist, and that's Mr. Robert Medrano. He is a part of the Medrano family, as we've heard before, well known for their political involvement and activism in the community, especially his father. He was a national union leader. Mr. Medrano was a member of the Brown Berets, in a group that made up a large part of the March for Justice in 1973. So we'd like to ask What was your involvement, sir, with the Brown Berets, and what exactly happened as you saw it that day and the part that you played?
Thank you very much. My name is Robert Medrano. I was 31 years old at the time that this incident occurred. I had just graduated from SMU and obtained my master's degree, and was getting involved in different organizations. And there were Image, LULAC, GI Forum, all kinds of organizations. And I wanted one that would be what I have learned in school, to be active, to see what I could do to bring about a change. And I learned more and more about the Brown Berets, and the Brown Berets originated in Los Angeles, and they moved out to move chapters throughout the Southwest. And then I read about their philosophy, fight against school, fight for justice, for employment opportunities, for representation. And that's when I got involved in learning that David Sanchez, the founder of the Brown Berets, had ran for school board in Los Angeles United School District. Of course, he lost, but through activism and get out the vote, canvassing vote, he did a good job. Then again, he ran for Congress against Robel, and he lost again. But he was encouraging people to participate, get inside those boardrooms. This is the way we're going to bring change, policies, anything that could be done. So I launched off a campaign to run for the Dallas School Board. The court order came down in '73 and said you must desegregate. You have a dual system of desegregation being practiced in the Dallas Independent School District. The superintendent at that time was Nolan Estes. And they ordered the school board to draw, because every 3 school board members got elected every year at large. So the whole city of Dallas, you could vote for any one of those 3. So the first time I ran, I took 15% of the whole city of the vote. So that wasn't going to get anything done. But we started looking at numbers, and as they were busy redistricting the district, they got a district for a Hispanic. I got elected. So now I'm in a point of leadership. That night, as Ms. Sanchez points out, I got a call too on that night about 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was Juan Perez, the founder and leader in Dallas, Texas, of the Brown Berets. He said, "Hey, Medrano, they just got their shot in Chicano." You go, "What?" 12 years old, and dismayed and all this kind of stuff. Well, what we're going to do? Well, we'll call in the morning to see what we're going to do real quick. So they said, okay, and then they called all the Brown Berets throughout the United States by phone. And so let's set up a march, because the consultation, what we should do a march. The first thing you should do is do a march to protest. And of course, the police heard about it, city manager, everyone started hearing about it. Oh no, so they knew about, could be problems, could destroy the city. And, so they were afraid. They were really afraid. So they got some other people to say, can you combat or pacify those people, militant people, we'll do our own march, and you all can handle it peaceful. So they got a hold of some peaceful persons, which I won't name. And so they got them to start a march. And then Juan Perez said, we're going to do the march at 1 o'clock. And these guys, the ones that got the peace, they got the permit, they got police escort, they got everything that in order the way it's supposed to be done. And they started the march, and the Brown Berets arrived as the march started. The march started without the Brown Berets, And so they finished where they were going to do, which was the city hall, and did their speaking and whatever they had to do. As they were coming back, then all the Brown Berets from across the nation had arrived at the Kennedy Plaza. And as we arrived at the Kennedy Plaza, we all started marching, and we confronted each other and said, no, let's go back. And when we came back, that's when everything just blew to pieces. No, we're not going back. Yes, we are going back. We need to speak. We got some speakers that want to speak about police brutality and this and that. So that broke loose, and so it went to a melee. Neiman Marcus, touches, Zales jewelry, everything was just lucky. So that concludes what I have to say.
One question for you, Mr. Medrano. Do you think that it was exclusively Dallas residents who created all that mayhem at the end of that march or during that march?
Well, it's in any march, there's always going to be people that are not even interested in the issue. They don't care. So in the march, the Socialist Worker Party got in there, the Bodart Patriots, the Black Panthers. A lot of people want to support us because what happened. It was happening in their communities too. Police brutality, this and that. So when they came in, then it was something that we had not consulted with them. We're going to do peace. It's going to be, and that's what did it. It's a mixture of those groups that joined us for the cause, but it went astray because they weren't in the direction we were going. They just turned around loose and said, here's an opportunity for what has happened in civil rights disobedience before, in different riots. So that's the cause of the mixture of everybody together.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. And I hope that we're going on time because I really can't see those cards, but we'll continue. And our third panelist will be Frances Rizzo. She grew up in the Little Mexico, West Dallas, Ledbetter barrio, and is recognized as a lifelong passionate community activist and grassroots organizer. And ma'am, could you please tell us about your involvement in the community after the murder of Santos Rodriguez, if you would?
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very tragic incident history. We have a history that still needs to be told. We're telling now because it's the 50th anniversary of the murder of Santos. But we had a history even before that with the Rodriguez family, and we were already involved in the Chicano movement. In Dallas, we had some of the more prominent leaders that were dubbed the Dirty Dozen, that included some of the names, attorneys and doctors and like that. And I happened to be the low man on the totem pole. I think I was the only one from a barrio and the youngest one in the group. But anytime we chose to go to a school board meeting or a city council meeting or to a community rally, we were called on to bring the moms and the kids and the families, and by golly, we did it. So we were already registering people to vote. We were already talking about the need about our history and bilingual education. We had managed to change the law so that our kids didn't get punished for speaking Spanish in school anymore. That had to be a change in the law of the state of Texas. You know, all of us that are born and raised in Texas, we can say, yeah, Tejanos, yeah, Chicanos, you know. Well, we have a history we need to remind ourselves about. We can be proud, but we need to be more proud that we've done our duty and due diligence in what needed to be done before and at the time that Santos was murdered. Because we had the Brown Berets and we had a lot of organizations, we were registering people to vote and getting moms to join PTAs and show up and volunteer and help out, that we were able to rally people to come out, not just for the march on that Saturday after Santos died, but in a lot of other things. So what happens afterwards? Tragically, anytime something very bad happens in our community, in any community, people get upset. We used to say, well, if it doesn't hurt your pocketbook, you're not going to react. Well, no, when they hurt one of us, we react. So we were able to, after Santos and even to this day, we've continued to register people to vote. Yes, and we've increased our voter turnout, but not anywhere near the representation or the percentage of our population. So if we're 30-40% of any given population, then we should be at least 30-40% of the voters, of the voter turnout. Okay, when we got involved in PTA, we uncovered a lot of issues in the schools because they were institutions that were built for white kids. They weren't built for us. We fought for bilingual education, and it took us before and after Santos's murder to fight for bilingual education. And in today's world, this is a success story, people. Remember this one and underscore it. Don't let us lose it. When we started out with bilingual education, we had to fight for it. We had to demonstrate at the school board meetings. We had to create all kinds of havoc in order for them to even pay attention to us asking for bilingual education. Then we had to demand bilingual education. And in today's world, not only are we more than 70% of the Dallas ISD student population, but we have the largest dual language program in the entire nation. So that's a success story we need to repeat all the time. I started out in Spanish radio with La Fabulosa Ques. It was the only Spanish radio station in our market. And I was a director of public service. So not only was I working in the community, it took Mr. Rodriguez 2 months to talk me into taking that job. He said, yo te enseño lo que necesitas saber de radiodifusoras, pero lo que necesito es alguien que conoce la comunidad como tú. So he finally talked me in. That's how I wound up in radio. So I'm running out of time. So I want you to know that in today's world, we don't have just one Spanish radio station, we have several. Not only do we have one TV station, we have several. We have social media in English and in Spanish. We have more police officers, close to 50% of people of color on the police force. We have bilingual teachers. We have all kinds of folks, and we have leadership now from younger people. In all of the organizations I've participated in, we keep pushing for younger people. Wake up, learn your history, learn what we already paid for, so you don't have to do it over again, so we keep progressing. Let's elect more of our people.
And
let's
thank you.
get more people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Point well taken. And our fourth panelist will be Mr. Raul Duarte. He was just starting out as a 19-year-old cadet in a lifelong career in the Dallas Police Department. He retired as a sergeant in the helicopter unit. And could you please tell us how this tragic event affected you as a young cadet and what you experienced? If you would, please, sir.
Thank you for having me on the panel. Thank you for your attendance to this event. Again, my name's Raul Duarte. I was born and raised in Dallas. Both sets of my grandparents, my maternal and paternal grandparents, lived in El Barrio, one on Payne Street and one on McKinnon. I attended St. Anne's Elementary School, Catholic school, then went to Jesuit College Prep. To giving you just a bit of a background for me so you can understand my perspective. My mom was trying to get us to a point where education was, got us to a point where education was very important, and for the education to continue for us as adults and make a difference in our community. At the time, I had just recently married in April of 73. We were expecting a child, and I was working in construction at the point in time. I graduated from high school. Being the rebellious young man, I decided I wasn't going to go to college. My mistake, but that's what had happened. When I married a lady that my mother-in-law, his name is Esther Ramirez. She was a political activist. She was a community activist. And with that said, she approached me and said, hey, Raul, there's an opportunity for you to join the police department if you'd be willing to. And so we investigated it, and it was a police cadet program. Basically what it was is I was in uniform but not a sworn officer, which means I was not sworn to carry a weapon. The opportunity for that was you went to school full-time, college, and then work part-time, and it flipped during the summer. So I embarked on I was accepted, embarked on the career that wound up spanning 45 years for me. So when the incident happened, again, I was not a sworn officer. We were still in training and basically an internship. And it happened, and I hired on in March, and it happened in July, obviously, several months later. Initially, there was some apprehension on my family's part and an apprehension on family and friends that I should join the police department because of things that had gone on in the community. But I was looking for a job and I was looking for education, which the department was providing. I joined when the incident happened, or the tragic incident happened with Santos. I was still, again, a cadet. And what that entailed was the entire police force was mobilized, which included us, even though we weren't sworn police officers. And what we wound up doing in those days that followed after the murder of Santos was we were involved in answering phones, we were helping directing information, we were gathering information for things for the police department to act on. With that said, I'll tell you this, that I was a little confused. By that I mean didn't know what to think. I just hired on the police department. I was 19 years old, 7 years older than Santos. So there was people in my family and friends that would question, what are you doing joining the police department? But with the assistance of my mother-in-law, she said, you need to stay, you need to go ahead and continue your career, because the only way to make change is to be either an activist from the outside or to join an organization and try to help change from the inside. And that's what I continue to do. There's changes that occurred because of that program. We are, at this point in time, I retired in 2018. At this point in time, we are at about 42%, close to 50% Hispanic minority on the police department, which makes a difference. When you're servicing your community, you have a face that looks like yours. It's easier to communicate. Not always easy, but it's easier to communicate and understand the cultures. And that was my perspective at that point in time.
Thank you very much for that perspective. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Moving right along, our fifth panelist is Mr. Rene Castilla. In July of 1973, he was the lone Mexican-American reporter in Dallas reporting for WFAA Channel 8. The Santos Rodriguez case is one of the two high-profile cases he covered during his 8-year experience in journalism. The other was the desegregation of Dallas public schools. And Mr. Castilla, could you please tell us about your first learning of the shooting death of Santos Rodriguez and your experiencing covering that incident, if you would, sir?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here and for discussing and keeping alive an incident that changed the direction of Dallas and its police department, believe it or not. It did have an impact. And I've got what I call a reporter's notebook, and I'm going to go over some of the items that occurred during that time outside of the community. But when I reported for work that morning of the shooting, the news director was Bert Shipp. And Bert was listening to the police scanner, or heard of the police scanner, that there was a shooting in Dallas's Little Mexico, and that a kid was shot outside his home, and it was involving a police officer. It looks like a bad shooting, so we're going to send somebody out there to cover it. So he assigned Martha McIntyre to call the police and get information that she could from that. And they asked me to look into trying to interview the boy's family. So that left me with trying to interview the boy's grandfather, because his mother, as you know, was not there. I researched to find out the information. Martha got the information about where the boys lived. And so I got my cameraman, and we went to his home there in Little Mexico. And he was very cordial. He received us when we knocked at his door. and I told him who I was, and I spoke in Spanish, and so that made me more receptive to him, I'm sure, because of his experience with the Dallas police officers a few hours before. But I sat him down and started talking to him. He was confused about the whole thing. He had no clue what the police were doing there. He had no clue why they wanted to see his grandsons. He just knew that there were these two officers that came in looking for two boys, and they wanted to talk to him. Can we see those boys? Well, sí, cómo no, pásale, he didn't know. When you see police officers at that time, you really didn't do anything but say, sí, señor, ¿por qué no? You just invite them in. So they did. They went in, and they took the boys out. The boys were in bed. They were in their sleep clothing. David was, I think he was, or Santos was shirtless. They suspected, the two police officers, Kane and Arnold, suspected that David and his brother Santos were the culprits because they knew of them. They've had experiences with them in the neighborhood. And that's all they knew, and they knew where they lived. So they said, let's go there and pull those boys out. They probably did it. When they took them out and took them in the police car, they drove back to the service station from what we could gather from, and these are all from police reports that we're using to give the story. The police officers sat back, moved David to the back seat from the reports that we were getting, and Daryl pulled out his gun, and he said, I know how to make them confess. I'll just pull my gun out, which he did. He pointed it at the boy, as the police had indicated. So the report that they did was pretty much true of what happened at that incident. They tried to make it soften, but it was a horrible thing that happened, and too many people were shocked by it. But the police officers, there were other police officers in the area. They came around, and so I then got my information, went back and started putting my story together. But the story didn't end there because there was more to tell following the shooting. Martha McIntyre wrote her story for the Evening News. I did my interview with the father. My family saw the show last night on television and wondered where I got that red jacket that I was wearing at that interview. And I said I was a hot reporter, but anyway. So at any rate, two reporters were sent to cover the story. And that night our stories led on the 6 o'clock news. And of course, all of Dallas was shocked. I tried to cover the story some more to do a follow-up on that. And so I had to make some phone calls. I was new. I was the only Mexican-American in the newsroom. So I was the most likely candidate to go and interview the father because I spoke Spanish. And that's how I got that assignment. It's just, I was there, I was the person that could talk to the father, and so they selected me to do that. I was a rookie reporter. I hadn't been there very long. But I did, it was an opportunity to show what I could do as a reporter, and so I jumped on the job to do it. As we looked around, then I got to know, and it was my introduction to the Mexican-American community of Dallas. My colleagues, and we have to give credit to them, my news colleagues and the Hispanic media, Marcos Rodriguez of KES and Jesse Gutierrez of El Sol de Texas. Those two guys were equally shocked. And so we were all reporters, we're all media people, and what are we going to do? And I was finding out information from them. I really didn't know them well, but they collaborated with each other. I think there was, he's here today and he can probably tell you what went on. Guillermo Galindo, he was on the radio. He was always on KES and complaining about something, but he was involved there with them at the time, as I remember. The community leaders that were involved were, of course, Pancho Medrano. That was my introduction to him, Adelpha Callejo, Johnny Zapata Gonzalez. All of these leaders came together on this one occasion and began to look at the lady and say, Renee, you talk too much. That's how I got involved in the story. Afterwards, if you got other points, I did meet with the police chief. I did talk to the district attorney, the city council, and if there's time to talk about what occurred then, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. We hope go ahead. Beside the stories and the insight that these panelists have given to us, we hope that it's given you another perspective A doctor that I once listened to on PBS, Channel 13, often said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, and that was Dr. Wayne Dyer. So here we've got a perspective of individuals who were actually there, who really contributed, as I said earlier, to a major change in the Mexican-American community. By my clock, we're about 6:15, and I'll have to ask Priscilla, do we have a Q&A at this point, or should we go to the lobby and conclude the presentation on stage? Do a Q&A now? Sure. Okay. If there are any questions from any members of the audience, we'd like for you to go ahead and ask the question and direct it to Rhoda Sanchez Gonzalez, Robert Medrano, Francis Rizzo, Raul Duarte, Rene Castilla. Any member of the audience have a question, please rise and give us your question.
The last time they participated was one of those Santos annual marches to the cemetery, and I happened to see some brown berets. I took their number and name and see what they were doing in activities. But yes, last time I saw maybe about 6 or 7, they were still dressed in khaki pants, khaki shirts. They were brown berets. But what activities they were involved, I didn't bother to, because it was for tribute to Santos. You know, it's like anything else. It's somebody's ready to spark something loose. So if somebody's ready to spark something, how did Juan Perez found out about it at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning? So it had to be somebody underground that informed him, hey, they shot a Hispanic, light the torch. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that's how it could, but I mean, as soon as that hit, the Reverend found out about it, I found out. So a lot of the leadership found out, you know, everybody goes a rage when that happened. So I think someone, because I got it from Juan Perez, so how he got it, I never bothered to ask.
Okay, we had a lot of information coming in to the newsroom. And,
sorry, one moment.
I'm just going to give you what City Council did. What we found out was that the mayor was Wes Wise at the time. He appointed a 3-member committee. George Allen was a pro tem, and and with 3 others on there, I think, that served on that particular committee. Their assignment was to deal with the issue of the bond that was set. Even Police Dyson said the $5,000 bond was too low. So did the district attorney, and they wanted to do something about that. So that committee put together a resolution to take away from the municipal court the authority to set bonds and move it to a district court. And so that was, George Schrader was outraged, and he was a conservative man. There were a lot of conservative people, but they just couldn't stomach what happened.
Are there any other questions?
Well, not really. Not until we got to the demonstration, and it wasn't to me it was just a general sense in the newsroom that we're going to call it a demonstration. The police were ready for us, and remember when I mentioned El Sol and KESS, they publicized it all over the place. I mean, how else could you draw that many people in a short period of time? So I gave them credit for, and I always have, for attracting the issue to the community. But we were never told in the newsroom, play it down or anything like that, just that it was a demonstration, and the police were not to react to the demonstration, and they were there. There was a strong police presence there.
And is there another comment or another question for someone in the audience?
President Duarte, thank you for your service. A lot of Dallas natives in this room, I suspect, some that aren't. And my question is, regardless of the ethnicity of police officers, and regardless of the ethnicity of the victims in the community, that everyday city police department deals with these challenges, there continues to be a lot of mistrust. Yes. Thankfully, since even the last 5 years amongst our locals. But to tie this into Santos in 1973, what can you say were some of the great accomplishments and effects in the Latin American community in Dallas and North Mexico you saw from 1973 to 2018? So what are you most proud of? Thank you.
Maybe we can start out, we got a new chief of police, the first one in history, Eddie Garcia. And now it's 60, I believe the media said 67% minority now. At the time of Santos, there were only 500 policemen and 5 were Hispanic at that time. So, you know, there's been some changes made. And we have had 4 or 5 black police chiefs, and every time a minority becomes chief, the increase of the recruitment generates, and the other tends to leave to other cities because eventually they'll say there'll be an all-minority police force within 10 years. That's something they can forecast what's coming. So we got Eddie Garcia.
Are there any other comments or any other questions from any of the audience?
I'd like to
yes,
take
sir.
the opportunity to add simply that racism is alive and well. Discrimination is alive and well. It just gets hidden better in today's world. I don't know that racism, like hatred, will ever be eliminated. We're taught this as children in catechism and in Bible studies. You know, there's negativity out there. Some of us call it the devil. You know, but that racism is a power play. Regardless of what ethnicity or what race you're talking about at any given time, it still exists in Dallas, Texas, in North Texas, in Texas. Look at all the news stories that we're dealing with just today about the governor and what he's doing at the border.
Oh, actually, so it is 6:23. So we do want to wrap up our Q&A session. Our moderators will be here afterwards if you do have any other questions or discussions you'd like to have with them. For the sake of our recordings, we are going to look to create some transcriptions of the questions that were asked for those of us who were not able to attend in person. I do want to give a few minutes to Mr. Rene Castilla to wrap up some of what you were discussing at the very end of your panelist moment?
Yes, what I was getting down to, I was going over the players, and the Dallas Police Chief Frank Dyson reacted with disgust. I mean, he couldn't believe this, and I couldn't believe that I heard a police chief say and admitted that we have racist cops on the police force. And that morning, he filed charges of murder with malice against Darrell Kane. I mean, he took deliberate action. The other thing that I noticed about his behavior was during the demonstration, there were police dogs, from what our reporters came back with, there at the demonstration. There was a police presence there at the demonstration, but they stood down. There was not a confrontation that at that time until it got carried away, and then people just spread out. But Police Dyson has also expressed disappointment out loud about the bond that was set for Kane, $5,000 for killing like that. To my surprise, 2 months later, he'd resigned. I don't know if it's because the way he handled the demonstration. I don't know if the way he addressed his police department having races or what it was. But when we found out in the news department that he just resigned, we said, why did he resign? So he was a good man, and he was really struck by this, and he was concerned about what it did to his department and the community. And I was impressed by his actions and what he said, but still in all, I just thought it's clear to make it clear. I wanted to make it clear that Dyson did have, and he met with the Hispanic community. He did do that, and he listened to their demands, and they wanted better treatment for the Mexican-American community and the minority community at large, and the way Santos Rodriguez was handled, and that a policeman shouldn't handle him like that again. So I just want to give that side of the story about what I saw in the police department and what went on with the police chief at that time. Now, was there another police chief that came along that had the same feeling? I don't have any idea, but that was my impression.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator tonight. Let's give them a round of applause for taking time to share their memories with us. We will now have a short intermission at the lobby with some light refreshments. The legal panel will start at 7:15. Please do keep in mind that food and drinks are not allowed in here, so have what you can in the lobby. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone. Again, my name is Jesse Moreno, council member for District 2 for the City of Dallas. Let's give it up for our first panel one more time. We are so fortunate to learn firsthand from y'all's testimony who grew up during the era of Santos. Let's work on sharing these same stories with our young generation. I want to thank all our partners and sponsors. This truly has been a coalition of amazing residents and community leaders. None of this could have been done without each and everyone's support and commitment. Even though I was not born yet when this tragic murder of Santos occurred, I was fortunate to learn firsthand the story from my father as a young boy myself. I stand on the shoulders of great leaders, such as the Medrano family. If we can please have members of the Medrano family, please stand up to be recognized. Lots of great work and progress has been made when it comes to police brutality. We've added much needed new policies and even a new police oversight board, including Jonathan Maples representing District 2. Jonathan Maples, if you can please stand. We've worked on renaming the Recreation Center, erected a statue in Santos' likeness. As we heard earlier, power is in numbers, and that was true 50 years ago, and it's still true today. So again, I encourage you all to contact your council members and mayor and encourage them to place the Santos Recreation Center on the upcoming 2024 bond program. With that, I would now like to welcome our next moderator, Diana Solis, Santos Vive.
Thank you, Jesse. I've got to tell you, Jesse has been such a persistent force on behalf of bringing recognition and dignity to the life of Santos Rodriguez. And buenas noches to all of you. Our panel is called Quest for Justice, from Santos Rodriguez to Jordan Edwards. These two cases are parallel in their horrors, but distinct in their outcomes. One child was brown, another child was black, the cop was white. Both cases resulted in convictions of the police officer, a rarity then, 50 years ago, and still now a rarity. We have a stellar panel of lawyers and judges to dissect the case, the two cases. First, I want to introduce you to Judge Lina Lavario. She's a retired criminal district judge and former Dallas County Assistant Public Defender who is now a visiting judge, arbitrator, and mediator. She first came to my attention about 20 years ago in an explosive story. She was an investigator hired by the City of Dallas to examine the fake drug scandal at the Dallas Police Department. Next to her is Sol Villasana. A civil trial attorney who grew up in Little Mexico and authored a book about that historic neighborhood and those who lived there.
Next to him is Daryl Washington, a civil rights attorney with a very important portfolio of cases, including representing the family of Jordan Edwards. He secured a $21 million settlement for the family only a few months ago. And he represents clients in civil rights, police brutality, misconduct cases, and wrongful death matters. Next to him, is another judge. Judge Michael Snipes was a Dallas County prosecutor in the case of Jordan Edwards. This West Point grad is also a retired judge and now a visiting judge. I'd like to start by taking you to 1973 and a newsreel from that period. It is with a WFAA reporter, and I hope we can call it up. Maybe not. Okay. Maybe not. Let me just go to the questions then. Okay. Okay. As I said, it was a rarity in 1973 to have a police officer convicted of murder to be indicted. And that happened with Daryl Kane. I'd like to turn to Judge Lavario about what the significance of that was for the community, that had happened.
At the time. Oh, is this working? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I was a child in West Texas in high school when when this happened, and so what I have done is, since I've been to Dallas, I've heard about Santos Rodriguez and learned all about him. And what I'm going to tell you, I'm telling you that because this is not from personal experience, but from what I've read and the stories I've heard, that the indictment and the conviction of this police officer had significant ramifications, just like the other folks have told you, not only for him personally, but for the community at large. And it appears that we're ready for your video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could I have a double click on the image of Santos? And here's the WFAA story, I hope. Another tap. Oh. Audio up.
Santos Rodriguez and his 13-year-old brother David at their nearby residence 6 blocks away. The death story of a 12-year-old Dallas boy began here at the FINA service station on Cedar Springs. 2 boys were spotted early Tuesday morning breaking into the back window of the service station. $8 in cash was missing from a pried-open cigarette machine inside the station. A Dallas police squad car answered the burglary call. 2 officers picked up 12-year-old Santos Rodriguez and his 13-year-old brother David at their nearby residence 6 blocks away and brought them back here to the scene of the burglary for questioning. While the handcuffed boys were sitting inside the car, Officer Daryl L. Kane pointed his .357 Magnum at Santos' head in an attempt to make him answer questions about the burglary. Seconds later, Santos couldn't answer any questions. He was dead, with a bullet in the left temple. The 2 boys lived with their grandfather at 2921 North Pearl. Carlos Menez told Channel 8's Renee Castilla the two police officers picked up his grandsons about 20 minutes before 3 o'clock.
There was enormous tension in the community, as you've heard, outrage. And I looked at the police report from that time, and it actually said that Cain was being investigated for murder. And I was shocked that they would be so blunt in 1973. And as we were talking, it was rare that a police officer would be convicted of murder. And did you want to discuss that anymore?
Well, I was just going to point out that even though I wasn't a part of the community here in Dallas, I think most of us are very familiar with the tension that existed back in that time. When we were young, we did not consider the police were there to protect us. Throughout the Southwest, police were committing police brutality against minorities. Including West Texas and including in my little town of Pecos, Texas, wherein the sheriffs in Ector County had beat a man to death, Larry Lozano from Pecos, Texas, and then had the gall to say it was suicide. And it was ridiculous because he was beaten to death. And he had bruises on the bottoms of his feet, places where he obviously could not have hurt himself. But we all were in a state of terror regarding police officers, and I think that's the way it was here as well. And so it really was incredible to finally get a police officer indicted and charged with murder with malice, as they called it at the time.
Okay.
If I could also might add, growing up in Little Mexico and as a boy, we did not have a good feel for the police. We knew that sometimes people would disappear on the weekends and they'd find their bodies in the Trinity River. The last time they were seen alive was with a police officer. You know, we knew that the police officers regularly preyed on people in the barrio, and we were very careful about being around them. And that just as Judge Lavario was saying, to keep this in context, in 1973, what's really horribly tragic about Santos's murder was it wasn't really unusual. It had been going on for more than 100 years in Texas. African Americans, Latinos, the indigenous people had been summarily executed or tortured and tormented, intimidated by law enforcement throughout the state for a long, long time. You know, this year the Texas Rangers are celebrating their 200th anniversary, and there was probably no more violent vigilante group that existed at the time than the Rangers, who were specifically targeted by Stephen F. Austin to kill Indians, to kill Native Americans. That was and they also went after enslaved people who were trying to cross the border for freedom into Mexico. It was part of their job. So what's the really sad tragedy is that it was not unusual, that it had happened a long time, and we were fearful in Little Mexico of the cops because we knew what they were capable of doing.
Okay, this next question's for any of you. Why do you think prosecuting attorneys were able to secure a conviction against the police officer? What was it about the elements of this case?
I think it was a variety of things. I think one of the things that I believe happened was that before Santos was murdered, there was another young boy, Michael Moorhead, that had been killed by Daryl Cain as well. And I don't know if y'all saw WFA's 8 report yesterday, but in it we learned that the black community had come to Henry Wade and asked them to indict Daryl Cain for the murder of this young boy. And he refused to do so because he didn't think a white jury would convict the white police officer. But he made a promise to the black community that Daryl Cain would not work as a police officer, they'd have him behind a desk. Well, 3 years later, guess what? He's not behind the desk. And I don't think that sat well with Henry Wade. And you cannot discount the fact that the murder of this young boy, Santos Rodriguez, caused an uprise. I strongly believe that there would not have been an indictment if the Hispanic community and the Black community had not gotten out there and marched and demanded justice.
Yes, Mr. Washington.
And I just want to say something really quick, just to add, just something when you prosecute in these cases. I know earlier we got introduced, and I want to apologize because it's a little difficult to see the audience, and as a litigator, I'm used to connecting with eyes, so I don't see anybody right now. But we didn't have the opportunity to really give Mike Snipes a round of applause after he was introduced. But I will tell you that Mike deserves a huge round of applause. And I'll tell you why in prosecuting these cases, and we look at the case 50 years later, and you would think things have gotten easier and better, but it hasn't. And I will tell you with Jordan's case, I had the opportunity to witness Mike firsthand work on this case. And the difference in prosecuting an officer and not prosecuting an officer, it stands right in the district attorney's office. If a district attorney believes and really want to put efforts into a case, I believe you can get police officers prosecuted. And the work and the efforts that I saw Mike put into that trial, Diane, I have never seen in my entire career seen a prosecutor put that much into it. And that's why I said Mike deserved a round of applause. But you would still think, and I was telling Diane, you would think 50 years later that things would be better. And, you know, sadly, I'm sitting up here telling you that things aren't better. Things aren't better in Dallas. I think we've found a way to not talk about things as much, but things are really bad. And, you know, the only way we're going to make a difference is that when we having these conversations, they don't end here. These conversations begin when you're in that jury room and when you're sitting in there. And, you know, when we are about to select a jury and the excuses starts to run, I want you guys to remember how important it is to serve on a jury. And if you aren't doing it, shame on you. Because so many people do not get a fair opportunity, because when it's time to serve on juries, attorneys know how to ask questions, certain questions about police officers that they know going to get certain responses out of you. And when they get those responses out of you, then you basically eliminate yourselves from serving on juries. So this could be a whole panel in itself, but just remember, we have the power to put an end to this police brutality.
Okay. Judge Snipes, is there anything you'd like to add about your prosecution and your abilities?
Well, one thing I would say is that one of the lucky breaks that I got on this case as far as successful prosecution, of course, there's nothing lucky on something as horrible as what happened to poor Jordan. But Daryl and I have been friends for like 30 years, and he, in fact, we used to play basketball against each other years ago. And so when I found out that he was representing the family, I was assigned to be the lead prosecutor on the case, I knew that there were not going to be any logistics issues at all, and there were not. And we had a meeting of the minds on nearly every substantive issue. It is true that things still need to change, but I will tell you that one of the things that we did in this case, and that they do all the time in the district attorney's office's case, anytime there's an officer-involved shooting, the DA's office does a collateral investigation of the case to see whether the officer-involved shooting was legitimate. We did that in Jordan's case, and we figured out pretty early on that the body camera video showed that there was no legitimate reason for what the defendant, Roy Oliver, do in this case. That was maybe a day or so after Jordan's murder. Subsequently, like the day after, Daryl brought the family up. We had interviews with all the family members. We knew immediately what our course of action was going to be. We had a very collegial relationship. We worked as a team moving forward. his civil case, my criminal case, and ultimately I believe that we got just about as fair and as just a result as we could have gotten in the case.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we cue up the story, Jordan Edwards? We need a few taps on the image of Jordan Edwards and it should pop up. While we're waiting, let me sneak in a question about the Austin jury in the case of Santos. Was that a jury of diverse people in 1973?
No, it was not. I got a hold of the trial transcript, including the strikes.
Roy Oliver is
There were only
already serving a fifth.
Okay, I think we've got the,
Okay, should I wait?
why don't we wait? And there we go.
15-year prison sentence in Jordan Edwards' death. This right here was a civil lawsuit brought here in federal court, which ended late this afternoon with one of the largest settlements known in the country going toward Jordan's father. In all, $21.6 million.
You know, we're just really glad that a jury in Dallas County sent out a message loud and clear that killing young children will not be acceptable.
A jury of 6 finding former Balch Springs officer Roy Oliver used excessive force and showed malice when he shot and killed Jordan, a 15-year-old passenger in a car that was speeding away from a house party police had busted. Jurors awarding Odell and Jordan's estate a total of $21.6 million, in part for mental anguish the teen suffered realizing he was about to get shot and the loss his father has suffered since. Very important, though, jurors also decided Oliver is not entitled to qualified immunity. That's legal protection that has shielded officers from liability in past shootings. His defense attorney and the combat veteran himself also saying and trying to convince the jury that he was reasonable when he fired, thinking he heard shots. Jordan's father says this is not about the money. It's about change and accountability.
It's never been about the money. It's just, just bringing justice for my son. Money can't bring him back. I'd rather have him sitting right here next to me right now instead of dealing with this and money. Money is it's not the issue. It just shows the coward he is. He just come up with excuses on why he done it.
And Odell there reacting to Roy Oliver taking the stand late this afternoon and again saying that he felt his actions that night were justified. Oliver also basically telling the jury he's broke. He has no money. He wouldn't be able to pay back the $13,000 that it cost for Jordan's funeral. So really, we don't know if this family will ever see any of this money that has been awarded. There also could be an appeal. However, Roy Oliver is up for parole in 2 years, and this family's attorneys say that they really hope this case sends a message to the parole board and basically making sure that he does not get out in 2 years, apparently. Reporting live in Dallas, Maria Guerrero, NBC5. Roy Oliver is already serving
Okay. I was asking about the jury in the Santos case, and I'd also like to know about the jury in the Edwards case, and if that was an all-white jury or a diverse jury.
There was only one African American on the jury. The rest of the people who were on the jury were white.
But in the criminal case, there were numerous African Americans, 3 or 4 as I recall, 1 or 2 Hispanic people. But to me, I don't think it really mattered. I think that all of the jury looked at the facts and the evidence as it came out in this case, and it didn't matter to the jury whether it was black, white, brown, or green. They decided that the case showed that Mr. Oliver had murdered Jordan Edwards, and that's the way the verdict came out.
Right, and in the Darrell Kane case, there were only 2 Hispanics that were called as potential jurors. 1 Hispanic female said that she could not be fair, so she could not serve as a juror, and the other Hispanic was stricken by the defense, by Daryl Kane's attorney, so it was an all-white jury.
Okay.
But I will say there has been progress made. Dallas County, as you know, is a very progressive county, and since I started practicing in 1988, we've made huge leaps and bounds to increase the number of minorities that get called to serve on jury duty.
I guess the only problem we run through with the civil cases is we're not in state court. With the civil cases, we're in federal court. So unfortunately, our jurors are not just coming from Dallas County. They're coming from a lot of the surrounding counties. So it would be great if it was all Dallas County,
right,
taking up a Dallas County issue.
You know, and also Judge Lavario mentioned the issue about the police and what their past is, and when they get in these situations. Kane had actually injured 4 people before he had shot 2, 1 to death, injured 2 others. Instead, he goes back into the barrio to be a police officer. That lack of transparency, not understanding what you should do with officers like that, not wanting to do something with officers who have a tendency to do these kind of things. I think you still see that today now with the police. This lack of transparency about what's going on in the department and how they're dealing with troubled cops.
Okay, thank you. As we were prepping for this panel, we stumbled on the fact that Kane had injured 4 other people prior to Santos Rodriguez, and that was in the federal civil case. Can you tell us what happened in the federal civil case, the wrongful death case for Santos? It was very different than what happened in Jordan Edwards' case.
Well, as Mr. Washington indicated, clearly it's in federal court. It's a different kind of territory than state court. And I get back to the kind of the context of it, though. In 1973, there were very few Hispanic lawyers in Dallas. It's very different. We have some. Fortunately, that's changed now in 50 years. We have a lot of people of color who are lawyers. Many of them up here on the stand right now, but not so back then. And you had, and a lot of those lawyers who were in Dallas were criminal lawyers and were somewhat tight with the cops. You know, that was their bread and butter. That's how they made their living. You know, defending people in the criminal courts and dealing with the police and dealing with the criminal court system. So it's not surprising that none of the Dallas lawyers came forward to work on Santos' civil case. They had to hire Ruben Sandoval out of San Antonio, and he brought in also Philip Hardberger out of San Antonio. But they're the ones who handled the civil case in federal court. And they filed the case. They filed it quickly, right after a couple months after the Santos was murdered. The city quickly, they brought in the city, the 2 police officers. The city quickly filed a motion to dismiss. And the way the law was in those days, they were able to get out. The city in those days was not considered a person who could be sued under the civil rights statutes of 1871. And so they got out. And so then they filed against the former police chief, Dyson, who I think you heard mentioned in the earlier symposium, and that they pressed forward with that. And then they filed a 3rd complaint a while later, trying to bring in the city again through a kind of a negligent entrustment idea, because he was shot in the police car, so you know, there was some kind of connection there. But it moved along. They did discovery. They were ready for trial, it seems like, certainly probably by the late 75, which would have been about right, ready to go to trial. But then all of a sudden things go very, very quiet in the case for a year and a half. And then finally, in February of 1977, it's dismissed by the judge, apparently under agreement by all the parties involved, all the lawyers, dismissed with without prejudice, so it could be refiled, but it was awfully late by that point. And that's how the case went down. And I don't think Bessie got a nickel out of it. If it had been a settlement, they would have wanted a dismissal with prejudice. They would want never to see anybody again in the courtroom. So that's what happened. And it's very unfortunate and very troubling that the family of Santos saw no justice whatsoever in the federal court system. back in over 50 years ago.
Okay. And in 77 and 78, there was a national push among Latino leaders to get the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to open a civil rights investigation. And there's quite a number of news articles about that, about meetings with then Attorney General Griffin Bell's staff in Houston. Maldoff out of Los Angeles came in. Vilma Martinez was then the executive director. President Carter even wrote a letter, a very poetic letter, about the case and how troubled he was, because in one of these meetings he'd been shown photos of the dead body of Santos. Would any of you like to talk about what happened in that situation?
What Mr. Sandoval did after the federal lawsuit, civil lawsuit was dismissed, was there was a push to get the Department of Justice to file under the Civil Rights Acts and the criminal section of the Civil Rights Act. It had been done before in other jurisdictions. They pressed, there's a statute of limitations issue there. It was coming up in the summer of '78, 5 years. And so that's when the push, prior to that, there was this push to get the Justice Department involved, get them to file a criminal complaint against the police officers. And as you say, it got really nowhere. They decided not to, the Justice Department decided not to do that, and President Carter thought it was a mistake, but he, like presidents now, they try not to get involved with their Justice Department on their prosecutions. You see it happens all the time now. The Chauvin case out of Minneapolis, the George Floyd case up there, they went around and immediately sued him in federal court under the civil rights statutes, and he pled, guilty. He's fine. Basically, he did it where you could go to federal prison rather than state prison in Minneapolis. Is a better place to house him, and he knew that. But it's done with some regularity now. But it was certainly not done in the case of Santos.
Okay. One of the things that Mrs. Rodriguez wanted was an apology from the city, and she got that. She got one from the then mayor, Mike Rawlings, 10 years ago. She got an apology 2 years ago from the current police chief. She got another one from his chief deputy, Albert Martinez. Could you all talk about the value of an apology to a grieving family?
I mean, I think an apology really goes a long way. But unfortunately, we don't get them very often because police departments generally go into the defense mode. And I think many of them believe that by apologizing to the families, that you somehow are admitting to some type of wrongdoing. And in most cases, that's not the truth. I'll give you an example with the case I'm handling here in Dallas, Genevieve Dawes. Genevieve Dawes was 21 years old, and Genevieve was shot over 8 times. And young mother, the city of Dallas ended up firing the police officer, and the officer got indicted. The police, they wrote all the things that this officer did wrong. In fact, there was an article in the Dallas Morning News, I think a week or 2 ago, about this officer, and they actually disclosed, similar to this Daryl Kane guy, all of the bad things that this officer was involved in. And despite all of this, no one from the city of Dallas have come to the Dawes family and apologized and said that they're sorry that Genevieve was killed that way. And you can imagine how difficult it is for the family, because the family see all these cases throughout the country, and you have some police chiefs or mayors that will step up and they will apologize. And they just wanted to know why this didn't happen with Genevieve. And the sad thing about a lot of these cases, and Mike and I talk about this all the time, one of the things with Jordan is that there was nothing they can find wrong about Jordan. Because typically what we see in the newspaper is that they put the victims on trial. And they start talking about all the bad things that the victims did. But we never hear the bad things about the police officers. It's always the victims who can't defend themselves. They couldn't do that in Jordan's case, even if they wanted to, because you had teachers, everyone come and defended Jordan's character. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, when people are killed and they have criminal histories, that is used against them. But I've always said, I don't care a person's background. I don't care what a person's been through. That does not justify an officer's taking a person's life. And that's something that we have to fight through so hard, because once that narrative gets out there that this person had a criminal background, then people start to close their ears. They don't want to hear nothing else. And I think that's the unfortunate and that's the unfair thing about it. It was the same thing with the Botham Jean case. There was nothing really bad that they were able to say about Botham. The same thing with Santos' case. There was nothing really bad that they can say, and it makes those cases easier to prosecute. But I still think there's a lot of work that can be done.
And actually, in Santos' case, before Santos' body was even cold, the police department had let out his juvenile file on the cases. They did. You're trying to try him, and he's been murdered by a police officer. But that's the first thing they did.
Or they try to detract from the fact that they're children. And like in the Darrell Kane case, when they cross-examined David Rodriguez, they asked him, for some unknown reason, isn't it true that Santos had a mustache?
Really?
Yeah. That's what they asked. To try and give the jurors a different perspective of him, like he really wasn't an innocent child because he had a mustache, I guess is what they were trying to do.
The first thing that they did with Jordan's case, and Mike did such a great job with it, is they tried to portray these gentlemen as gang members.
Gang members?
As gang members, and Mike can address that. Mike did one of the best jobs I've ever seen on cross-examination. And Mike, I think you should talk about this, because we don't get a chance to hear from prosecutors who actually do these, but you can talk about some of the things that they tried to portray these poor kids as.
There was a report that there was gunfire at a nursing home just to the west of where the murders went down, that initially the police tried to indicate that my victim, poor Jordan, and his brothers might have been involved in. We caught a very lucky break on it. We had 2 eyewitnesses up at the nursing home, one of whom knew the individuals that were involved in this. It was actually a gang called the Bank Brothers. So we were able to definitively show, through some pretty hard brass knuckles work with my investigators and me, that my guys couldn't possibly have been involved in that shooting. And that in fact that was a complete red herring. So a lot of gumshoe work by my investigators and me and my fellow prosecutors on it. We were able to essentially totally exonerate both Jordan and his brothers and their best friends.
Okay. And Judge Snipes, one of the things that I believe happened in the criminal case was that the officer said that he feared for the life of the other officer. What happened next?
Well, one of the things that happened was that his partner, and God bless him for this, he had the guts to say that to the best of his knowledge, he never felt in fear for his life. And essentially, although he didn't say this, he essentially said by way of implication that he didn't think that the shooting was justified. But then on top of that, we had a body camera, we had 10 eyewitnesses on the scene, and we had some excellent slide-by-slide video that showed that there's no way that he could possibly have reasonably thought that his partner was in any danger whatsoever, let alone in danger of being killed. And I think that's what ultimately won the day for us.
I agree with Mike, and that's why when I saw the officer after the civil trial, I actually had to shake his hand, because I will tell you, had that officer decided to be dishonest and looked at the jury and told the jury that he felt like his life was in danger, could have had a serious impact on the case. So In that situation, I was able to have some confidence and some faith that there are good police officers. I mean, in fact, I think the majority of the police officers are good people. It's just the really bad ones that are being protected that gives this system a really bad name. But had this guy got on the stand and actually been dishonest, who knows what would have happened.
Okay. All right. The judgment of $21 million, that's quite a lot. Is it one of the highest in the country?
That judgment was one of the highest. And I mean, the unfortunate part is so many of these cases never get to trial. You heard them talk about qualified immunity.
Yes.
And let me just tell you how ridiculous qualified immunity is. You had a guy who was convicted of murder, and Mike and I talked about this. And he was allowed, although he was convicted of murder, to use the qualified immunity defense in a civil trial. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you're talking about somebody that's been convicted of first-degree murder is arguing to the jury that his conduct was reasonable. So, I mean, that was, I'll be honest with you, it was a very scary situation to be in, because I'm following Mike, who has already gotten a criminal conviction. And I said I would have to basically move out of Dallas had Mike gotten a criminal conviction and this guy got, exonerated in the civil trial. So it was really stressful, but it just a commitment to it, and being dedicated to this family, just looking at this family in the eyes and just seeing what they're going through. You guys can never imagine just talking to a mother or talking to a father who lost a child. That's just not normal. That's not the normal process, and that is what makes you want to work so hard for families when they deal with something like this.
Indeed. I've done that a few times myself in my career, unfortunately. So, tough question. This judgment was $21.6 million. Will the family see any of that money?
Well, I can tell you, we still fighting post-trial motions. The defendants filed motions after the verdict. It's very unfortunate that we still fighting this. So once we deal with the post-trial verdicts, motions, then they're going to likely file an appeal on this. And they just make you spend, so much of your resources fighting something that's just bad. This is a bad case, and when you look at Santos and you think about that there was no settlement or anything in that federal case, part of the reason is, unfortunately, with the work that you have to put into it, you have people that decide that it's not worth that effort, and the family suffers. So this case may well go all the way up to the Supreme Court before anything can happen. And just really quick, because this is so important, you said something earlier about the motion to dismiss in the city was released. Well, that happens still today. And, one of the things that I know, we fight for qualified immunity, but what so many people don't know is that cities are not vicariously liable for the acts of their officers, which means that a city can hire a really bad police officer. That police officer can go out and do something really bad, and the city is off the hook. And I think that law really needs to change. I think police officers should be required to have liability insurance. I think there's a lot that need to happen, and these conversations need to go on. And I would love to see something like this in the name of Santos and Jordan's name, where there's some type of laws that are passed to make this a requirement, make that officers have to have liability insurance, so that Santos's mother, money would never bring him back, but I think families, for what they have to go through, it's owed to them. So I think we should try to pass that.
All right.
And remember, if the Justice Department had gone ahead and prosecuted the Santos killer, there still would have not been any money, and it would have just been a criminal case again.
All right. Is there any city that's volunteered to provide restitution without a lawsuit being filed? It seems like we're at that point in the U.S. with so much attention now to police brutality. And has that happened anywhere?
Now, what's the question one more time?
Has any city volunteered to pay the family before a suit? Baltimore, maybe?
Yeah, I will tell you, and I know we have our council members and a lot of people in here. I love Texas, I really do. But I will tell you, with Genevieve Dawes' case, the city of Dallas fired the police officer. The city council authorized over $350,000 to be spent in legal fees defending a police officer that they fired. I mean, and you say, what sense does that make when you fire the police officer for taking somebody's life, but you're going to go out now and defend that police officer? I mean, these are the things that are not being mentioned here. And I will tell you, Dallas is probably one of the toughest cities on victims of police brutality. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. It's just one, because you have cases that go on that you ought to not spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defending bad police officers. Give that to the families. Help the families somehow go through counseling and get the therapy that they need. But that's not being done because we're not having these conversations and letting people know some of the problems that we go through when we're dealing with these cases.
Okay. And Genevieve Dawes died not far from here, right?
That's correct. And, you know, when you go home this afternoon, I want you to go on YouTube and I want you to look at the Genevieve Dawes body cam. And I have not seen a case that was so egregious, that was not justified whatsoever. But the thing is, when we're dealing with these cases, it is so very difficult to get over qualified immunity. You have to almost show, and again, this is something that we can talk about all day, but it's very difficult. But you say something that's important. Can we have cases settled without filing a lawsuit? Yes, but it takes all you guys. It takes y'all gone out, because every time when it's time for election, people are coming to you asking for your votes. So we need to hold people accountable when something happened in our communities. And we need to let people know that if you don't take care of our communities, then we're not going to vote for you anymore. So when you start holding people accountable, when you go out and you let people hear your voices, it makes a difference. And that's what you see in a lot of other major cities when you see these settlements before these lawsuits. It's because people are out marching and protesting for days at a time, and they put the pressure. And you really need to put the pressure in order to get change.
Okay.
And I think also, too, that remember there's another component here, and these are the judges. We don't talk a lot about that sometimes, but judges get appointed or they get elected, right? So it's really important. I see more and more good plaintiffs' lawyers like Mr. Washington pushing this qualified immunity defense and kind of pushing them back in really hard against that. But the way judges are, some of the more conservative ones will actually obviously be very resistant to that. But there is movement in the law. We've seen that happen. The city can no longer say it's not a person, just like they did with Santos' case. They can now are subject to suit in a Section 1983 case. But so those judges can be pushed and you can make honest arguments for changing the law. It's part of being a good lawyer. And you ask judges to look at that and think about it. Look at that body cam. Talk about really what's going on here in these cases and what's in the best interest of justice. And you're seeing there's a Tony Timpa case right now going. It's been kicked back from the Fifth Circuit. A very conservative group of judges over there say, well, wait a minute. What happened to Mr. Timpa? I don't think qualified immunity is going to apply here in this kind of situation. You need to take that case and try it and let a jury decide that case.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to open it up to questions. We have a distinguished audience, and we also have some people who really know a lot about police violence. Does anybody want to raise their hand and stand up and ask a question? That's Hilda. Hilda, okay.
Thank you guys for being there. Each one of you. I want to address three things. Talk about qualified immunity, apology, open up a new statute for time because is it kind of admitting culpability? And then to the statute of limitations, it goes back to both of those questions. So what do you say?
So just to clarify, you're, as far as reopening up a federal case against the city of Dallas and Darrell Kane, you're asking, since the mayor apologized, the chief of police apologized, can you reopen the case because that's the new evidence or an admission of guilt or something like that? That's something for the civil lawyers.
I have a lawyer friend that's helping the Rodriguez family, but we're waiting to see the outcome of this event and all the events, because I think under 1983, they can maybe possibly reopen the case with culpability because they have apologized and sort of admitted culpability. What say you?
Let me just answer that without this being legal advice. We're just talking right now, all right? It's very difficult to get over that statute of limitation argument. I mean, it happens all the time. I've seen judges write opinions and they start off and say, you know, this has been one of the most egregious situations I've seen. However, the statute of limitation argument, they have that, and that's just, it's hard. I'll be honest with you, and it would just be very difficult, I think, to reopen the case this long out, just to be honest.
Is there not an opportunity for a right to sue letter of some sort? I know that, like in EEOC, if you file a complaint and your time has passed, you can still file a complaint, ask for a right to sue, and then an attorney go to court, and you still have your day in court. Because we're all, I think the Second Amendment allows us to have our day in court. So even though they had their day in court was dismissed, now the other thing is that because Chief Dyson knew of the 4 incidences and the murder of more 10 or more, they still have Darrell Kane out. So they, in a sense, are culpable for keeping him with a loaded gun after knowing 4 incidences plus a murder 2 months prior.
Well, one thing else to remember too is it's usually when you're looking at the qualified immunity issue, you're looking at what the law was at the time of the incident. And the law 50 years ago was not good for the case. So I don't see how you go forward to the new law about how that works now. Because
Well, I think the city, in the goodness of their heart, like Diane said, is offer compensation. You guys don't understand that David and his wife live in poor conditions, health-wise, mentally, emotionally, physically. They don't even have a fan that works in their home. They just got them this week. They don't have food on their table every day. No one thinks about David, who is still alive and had to witness that. And he is a teddy bear. He can't even get out of his home without looking over his shoulder in fear of police, even today.
Okay.
Well, just to, like I said, the statute of limitation argument would be difficult, but I do think we as a city can have compassion and do things for people that we know were done wrong. We should not always, I believe, hide behind the law. That family was done wrong. The family was done bad. And I think if there's an opportunity to right a wrong, then that should be done. I mean, and start a campaign and try to fight for that. It can be done.
All right. Okay, thank you. This gentleman over here, no, you. Is that you, Jonathan Maples?
That's me.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for being here. So accountability. You know, as I mentioned, I was part of watching a 7-year-old boy 50 years ago. But you know, the more I've been involved in the last month with Santos Rodriguez, the more I realize that the more things change, the more they stay the same. You know, I'm a member of the community police oversight. And it puzzles me that there's not a national database that notifies every police department in the country when a bad cop has been let go for a bad reason. Because we know that the police union is stronger than all the police chiefs and all the city council. We know that because we know that the first people to arrive at the scene in the Santos case was the police union. He wasn't there to render aid or just, take pictures. He was there to get their stories together to defend it. Yeah. So we need to make sure, and we need to fight for a national database that says, hey, this cop did X, Y, Z. And every other police department needs to know, because if a cop gets let go here in Dallas, he go to Oklahoma City and get a job. And do the same things. And if there was a database then we may not have had this situation. Thank
you. If I can follow up with something, I didn't even think about this. You may not have thought about this, but on a daily basis in the courthouse, you have judges, more so now, that are making findings, for example, that a police officer coerced a confession, let's say, whether it's a murder case or something like that, and the confession is suppressed. Or that the police officer violated a defendant's rights and illegally obtained evidence against the defendant. When the judge makes that finding, a judge can't report it to the police department. I don't know if the DA's office reports it to the police department, but there's no database for that either. How many times a judge has found that a police officer acted in the wrong by violating a person's rights, either by obtaining an illegal confession or illegal evidence.
And also, too, the police department's internal affairs, they're investigating, when they look at these bad cops, they need to do a better job of that. That's just part of what you're talking about. I mean, how would you even know to report it if the investigation internally says nothing happened? So you're kind of back in that same square again when you're not having good internal affairs investigations of complaints against police officers. I would argue they're not done well at all.
Diane, can I say real quick? I apologize.
Okay.
I spoke about 21-year-old Genevieve Dawes. Well, I just wanted to introduce Genevieve's mother, her daughter, and her grandparents. If you guys wouldn't mind just standing up really quick. Genevieve's daughter was a little baby when I first started representing the family, and now she's a beautiful young girl growing up. So this is why we fight for the families.
Thank you for coming. We're honored that you're here. Thank you. A question from Jerry Hawkins.
They told me come up here because you all can't see through the lights. My name is Jerry Hawkins. My organization is Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. I do want to let the family know that we do care about Santos and his family. I met his brother, and we provide them very small funds every year. It's not enough, and we need to do more. But my question is about something that we didn't bring up, in that Officer Oliver was the first in 40 years in Santos, with decades, 4 decades, in Dallas County, convicted of a crime. In between this time, Dallas Police Department was known as one of the worst police departments in the country. My question for you all is, between this time, what have you all experienced, particularly from maybe prosecutors, attorneys, that made this case very different beyond the egregiousness of this officer killing this young boy, because that's a long time. There were hundreds of people murdered by the police in between Santos and Jordan. So So I want to know, like, you know, what do we do as a community with these 100 people who have been murdered or disappeared by the police, but haven't had any justice for these folks in between that time?
Well, actually, I would just say that under Judge Johnson's administration and also now Judge Crusoe's, that they are very proactive in making sure that we have objective, reasonable looks at potential crimes committed by officers. You mentioned the Dallas Police Department. That was not the organization that Roy Oliver was a member of. He was in the Balch Springs Police Department. And although you're correct that there had not been any murder convictions over the last 50 years, there have been convictions for a variety of other crimes, ranging from things like the fake drug thing that Judge Lavario worked on to several others. It's a process, and I think that Dallas, Texas is in a much better situation than it was certainly 50 years ago, and I would say even 10 years ago. And I know that both District Attorney Johnson and District Attorney Crusoe are extremely progressive on that and doing the very best that they can. And I think that you should give them time and faith and credit, because I think they're working very hard on it.
Okay, thank you.
And that's one reason why we have to pursue these cases, and not take quick settlements all the time, because if you take a settlement, then you don't get a chance to do any discovery, and you don't get a chance to look at the policies and procedures. I was so surprised when the police officers involved in officer-involved shooting here in Dallas, they are not interrogated. They get to have their attorneys with them immediately. The union provides them with an attorney, right? Dallas used to have 72 hours before an officer had to give a statement as to what happened. So in 72 hours, they get together exactly what happened. Now, when they give their statement, their attorneys write the statements for them. And what they do is, the only question that they get, right, is they say, are you prepared to read your statement? They read their statement into a recording, and that's the end of it. They're not asked any questions at all. Why did you do this? There's no reconstruction done, whatever. So when you ask why in the 40 years, why there haven't been more police officers convicted or even charged, it's because we have police officers investigating police officers. And that's your answer. I mean, but when Mike and the DA's office you have your own units that now go out and do investigations, that just made things a little easier. But again, I mean, there's so much that we could talk to you guys about. We could be here for 6 hours. But I just think, again, this is just something good. I'm just glad we have this opportunity to just tell you about some of the things that we deal with.
And we don't want to always be reactionary also. I mean, we were dealing with cases, Santos and Jordan and others, cases like that, that we've had to react as lawyers in the justice system. You know, those things should not have happened. Right. You need to get on the other end of that and be look at preventative measures beginning at the police department and internal affairs, and how they hire, how they train, and what they need to know before you have to bring in the entire justice system to take care of these bad cops. It has to start with you, the public, and demanding that. Dallas has the 9th largest police department in the country. You should expect more, and you should demand more.
Okay, thank you. We have a question over here.
Yes, my name is Jason Robo. I'm actually the chairman of the Community Youth Oversight Board that Mr. Baker serves on. I want to touch on some things that Mr. Baker said and something that Mr. Washington said in regards to city council, meaning that when city council elections come around, it's maybe 3% of the voting public. If it's a mayoral, we might get up to 9. But one thing that we need to understand is that, and I want to make a correction on something Darrell said, the city council, the city didn't pay the $300,000 to defend that office that you're going to be done. You paid, right? Your tax dollars paid. And so if your tax dollars are paying for this, you have to demand more. The police union. Some city council members, not this one, some city council members fighting for police endorsement.
Right.
So they're getting police endorsements. They're getting endorsements And then, once they're elected, those same police officers negotiate with them on the contract with the city. Where else can you do that and that's not considered collusion or bribery? You know, so we have to demand better. Whenever there's a city council election, policing never comes up. It's never a time. That should be one of the topics, one of the highest things that people should be discussing when they are interacting with city council candidates. That should be something that should be discussed because of the fact that it's up to all of us to hold those that we elect accountable. And it's up to those that we elect to hold the police department. Until we do that, you know, it's just a Band-Aid. It's just a Band-Aid. There'll be another situation Mr. Washington will have to represent and hopefully he can get justice. But you know what? One thing you never get is that lost family member. So I ask all of you, demand more from your elected officials.
Thank you. Yes. Another question.
Yeah, we've heard the term qualified immunity many times tonight, and I know that's a huge issue in the culture and activists all around the country. I would be very interested to hear what you think the future of qualified immunity is. What are the legal means to get it removed, or the legislative means? What can people do on that specific issue?
Well, the process is being chipped away at a little bit at a time by, I think, the federal courts. You're seeing it opening up and making, you know, for terms are like unreasonableness and a reasonable person. This, all those things are beginning to move forward. There was something that would never have happened 50 years ago with Santos, but it's taken 50 years to get any kind of movement along that way. And the idea behind the whole qualified immunity was like, you know, you don't want people being harassed, city officials all the time by all kinds of things, you know, and taking up time and energy and money trying to defend on every little kind of complaint. Well, maybe that sounds okay, but when you're getting into the area of policing and the violence that policing can and does do at times, then that's going to, I think, that's probably where you're going to see it most start to crumble away, okay? You know, not something that some school board does or, you know, even a city council person, but you're going to see, I think, in the area of the policing some daylight out there.
There's an opinion, I wish I had the site to give to you, but qualified immunity was judicially created. And if you look at the act, qualified immunity was not even a part of the act. It was not even supposed to be in there. Basically, you were supposed to be able to have, because you could not always bring an action against a governmental entity or somebody operating under the color of law. So that was created, I think, in 1871, and when you look at it, qualified immunity is not discussed. There is a judge that just came out with a very powerful opinion, dissenting opinion talking about it, that he believed that they made a mistake by putting qualified immunity in. Because basically it gives an officer too much of an out. When there is an officer involved shooting, that it's a factual dispute. And when you have a factual dispute, that's not for the judge to decide. No disrespect to the judge, and I think Judge will agree with me. Yeah. When you have a factual dispute, that's for you to decide. But what happened is it's gotten too political. So because it's a political issue, now, that's why it's so important to vote, especially in the presidential election, because most of these cases are in federal courts. So when you have all these appointments now, people are pretty much making decisions based on a political affiliation, which is not the way it's supposed to be when we're talking about the law. So now you give a judge the opportunity to make that decision, it becomes a whole lot harder, which is why if you had a choice to have a jury trial or a trial by judge, which one are you going to do? Most people are going to do a jury trial, which is what qualified immunity should be. It should be something decided by a jury.
Okay, thank you. One more question over here.
Hi, I'm Nicoletta. I'm an expert in legal learning. This question
Well, I'll just tell you the improvements. I think we still have a lot of problems. There have been some improvements, but let me tell you the things that were game changers. And I can imagine what was going on with Santos and all these kids back then. They didn't have cell phones and they didn't have body cams. That really changed the game because you imagine back in the days when there was no cell phones or there were no body cams, when people would come up missing, when people were killed, it was because you didn't have that evidence. But in the Jordan Edwards case, it was the body cam video. A lot of these cases, it's the body cam. So that's something that I think the community needs to push very hard, because what we have in now is officers are going out and they turn off their body cams. For some reason, the body cams aren't working. I think there need to be very harsh penalties against police officers if there's ever any type of shooting, if there's no body cam footage, if their body cams have been turned off. So I think that's something that we need to really push to make sure that if these body cams, if taxpayers are primarily paying for it, we paying for it for transparency. We also saying in Genevieve Dawes' case, for example, and I hate to go over, but in that case, poor Genevieve was shot by this police officer. And the narrative that we had when Mary called, I read up on the story, and what the news reported was that Genevieve was trying to run over police officers. So as a result, they had to shoot. Now, Dallas knew this for like 6 to 8 months. That is not what happened. They had the body cam evidence, but they never released this to the public. It was not until there was Rebecca Lopez. Freedom of information. Yeah, she got in and they started getting in and getting the body cam footage. So this is something I think that whenever there is a shooting, officer-involved shooting, they should not be months or years before they put that body cam of what happened. The only time that body cam footage get out immediately is when it's going to defend the officer's actions. We're going to hear, they're going to put on this big, beautiful press conference, and they're going to play the video. But if it's something that's not in the benefit of the officers, then they hide behind the investigation, and that needs to change.
Yeah, this lack of transparency with the police is still a real problem, I think.
Okay, let's take 2 more questions and then close this for the evening. And over here. Thank you. And one last question, and then we're going to close for the evening.
Mr. Washington, I was particularly interested when you said that the accompanying officer in the Jordan Edwards case testified against his partner, that his life was never in danger, or so he felt. Is there a general reluctance among witnessing officers to testify against their partners, or is that a common thing or rare?
It's very difficult. I mean, and Mike could touch on this if he wants. I'm going to be honest. It's very difficult for an officer to tell on another officer. I think many of them want to do it, but when you do it, it becomes career ending. For example, that police officer is no longer working in Balch Springs. He left shortly after the trials. So it's career ending when you do it. And I've been in depositions where I've deposed 10 police officers. And you look in their eyes and you know that they're not telling you the truth. But, I mean, they will defend unfortunately, they would defend a bad police officer because it's just the culture that they feel like they have to do it. If they don't do it, it's a career killer.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you all, Judge Snipes, Judge Lavario, Mr. Washington, Mr. Villasana. And a huge shout out to the audience for such deeply felt questions. And thank you again for the Dawes family for being here. We really appreciate your presence. We also appreciate the presence of Daphne Rodriguez, who is the wife of David Rodriguez, who's shown up to get a string of events as we memorialize the short but powerful life of Santos. Thank you again.
No, because we're